recording, Will.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for being here. We're going to be talking about how to start planning for your eDay. This was a little more timely last week before a lot of districts actually started their eDays or started canceling school, but my name is William Goodman. I am the Director of District Programs for Idaho Digital Learning Alliance.
And my name is Ryan Gravett, and I am Director of Technology for Idaho Digital Learning Alliance.
And last week we did the same webinar. So if you attended our last week one, this will be a lot of the same content that you saw last time. We're repeating it based on the feedback we got last time that said we should redo this meeting. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in, talk about how to start planning for an eDay. So when you're building your plan for your eDay, there's a few things that you need to go through. We've got these 10 steps that we're going to walk through. And then we're going to talk about specifically what IDLA supports are available to help districts, and then some other services and resources that are out there. So we're going to walk through each one of these. If you have any questions, please feel free to throw them over in the chat, and we'll try to answer those the best we can. So one of the first steps you want to do when setting up for an eDay is you want to identify a leader. Identify the person that's going to be responsible for the rest of the plan we're talking about. This person needs to work collaboratively, and they need to have great project management skills. This person doesn't need to be the most technical person on your staff, and they don't necessarily need to be somebody in administration, even though that often helps. Really what you're looking for is somebody who can bring people together, who can lead a meeting, who can write a plan, and who can communicate that plan out to all stakeholders. Once you've identified your leader, you want to convene a planning committee. You want to bring together all your relevant stakeholders, which could include your leadership team, school board members, teachers, parents, principals, and others. Once you've convened your, go ahead, Ryan.
Just, on that, it's, we are now at a position where a lot of districts have released their students, most of them to an early spring break, but have released their students, at least in the Treasure Valley. I think as of yesterday, the state superintendent said there's around 50% of the state that had released their students, and I'm sure that number's growing as we continue to look at the different schools that are releasing with the president's announcement yesterday. And so, when we talk about that team, I think it's important to talk about how you are going to communicate to that team and how you're going to collaborate with that team. Collaboration changes a little bit in the ways in which you would maybe previously bring everybody into a room, and now you need to utilize a tool like this, like a Zoom or a Hangouts Meet, to kind of convene some of those stakeholders. And so just a different way in which you gather that collaboration. Some of it can be done via email, but the team is still important. I think it's easy to when you're remote, forget about the collaboration of that team or miss over that step. So just a thought there that mindsets have to change a little bit as you are dealing with these now that you are remote.
Yeah, and again, keep other stakeholders in mind too, because as schools close and as you plan for these eDays, you're going to also be affecting daycares, churches, other things, even potentially coffee shops that may have internet access where people would be going in. When we gave this webinar last week, that was prior to the president's announcement yesterday that we shouldn't be convening in groups larger than 10. But even that being said, there is the possibility of potentially having to park cars in parking lots of things like McDonald's or coffee shops, or even the schools, which we're going to get into in a little bit, to make sure that Wi-Fi is available and talk about how education can continue even if the physical building is shut down. But once you get your team together, you're going to have to start talking about the why. And that why is going to be important for a lot of different steps, because you're going to have to be able to explain both to your staff, your students, your stakeholders, parents, your community at large, why you're continuing education even though the school's shut down. You'll have some people that think schools should just shut down, that it should be treated as prolonged snow days, or that there's not a reason to continue the education while it's shut down and kids should be able just on free time. So you'll need to explain why this prolonged closure, why you need to move to eDay learning, why it's important to continue that education. And some of your answers might be to assist parents. Parents might need some assistance in how to continue their child's education without the physical building. You might need to explain preventing the need to make up days, or that you need to get the content covered. There's a lot of whys that are important talking points when we come down to the actual plan and the communication of the plan that your team needs to answer.
I think it's important here to realize that sentiment is going to change as time goes on as well. The sentiment that we have uh, right now from our stakeholder groups, whether that be parents or businesses, is probably not going to be the same sentiment that they have 2 weeks from now, and 3 weeks from now. So that sentiment's going to change. A and B. There's always going to be detractors. And there's going to, whether you close school or open school, there's going to be detractors. Whether you move to a eDay or not, there's going to be detractors. So having this why and having it documented, and then really sticking with that as a vision standpoint, I think is important in those communications from the start to the finish. And so the why can help you stabilize your message as you continue forward in what is going to likely be a very changing sentiment and a very changing level of uh, detractors, I guess, as time goes on and they realize what spending 2 full weeks at home with their children is like.
So after you've answered your why, your eDay planning committee needs to review best practices and think about your local considerations. So things to look at, district examples. We're going to share some resources at the end that you can see examples of what districts that implemented eDays in the past have done. Some of those were for inclement weather, some of those were for other reasons, but you can actually see some real world examples of how those districts handled it. You'll need to look at online pedagogy and what's the best way to move to remote teaching. How can you most easily move that way? And then how can that evolve and grow as you continue to be shut down? What curriculums do you have available? And what curriculums are available out there that may be free? And again, we're going to be showing you some resources. How can you utilize the curriculum you have? Just as a random example, you might have entire textbooks digitally on a CD that maybe came with some of the older textbooks. And so if you can find a CD drive somewhere, you might be able to pull that resource off and be able to distribute textbooks to students virtually. Those kind of curriculum needs can be looked at. What softwares do you have available? Or do you have Google Meets? Do you have Zoom? Do you have some way to deliver instruction synchronously? And then also, what do you have in the form of an LMS or Google Classroom or some other softwares that can help you deliver that content asynchronously? What partnerships exist in your community and what other partnerships can you make that'll help support moving towards this eDay? How are you going to help special education students? How can you maintain their IEPs, and what supports and services might you need to provide so that special education students can also continue their education? Do your students have internet access? Do your staff have internet access? And is it capable of streaming a synchronous learning environment, or is it only capable of asynchronous? And for those students who don't have internet access, what supports and resources can you provide to them? Whether that's printing packets, having local drop-off locations, letting them come pick them up, mailing them to them. What can you do for those students? What do your students have in the way of devices? If you're a one-to-one district and your students already take your devices home, you've kind of got that covered. If you're a one-to-one district and your students don't take their devices home, what modifications do you need to make, and how can you track beginning to send those devices home? And if you're not in either of those situations, what devices do your students already have? How are you going to serve lunch? You are able to continue serving lunch. If you've been on the SD's webinars, you've heard Colleen talk about different ways that you can serve lunch. And is your district going to serve lunch, and how, or breakfast? How are you going to schedule your day? Are your students going to be able to actually maintain a traditional school schedule from home, or might your older students be having to take care of younger students as their parents are working? Do you need to reconsider maybe students can work on the weekends or in the evenings to complete their work and not have to do it during the traditional school day? But how is that schedule going to look for your district and your students? How are you going to communicate your plan? And what kind of communications are you going to do? And we'll touch on that more in a minute. And what offline supports can you help provide students when they're not able to meet face to face?
Hey, Will, I know that this list here can seem overwhelming. And so, um, I would say that sometimes things feel overwhelming because we feel like we have to do them right away. And the reality to this is that you can take your time as you go through each one of these considerations and then only do online learning when you're ready. I think that there's still a lot of uncertainty in terms of how long schools will be out before they start meeting again together. And I know some schools are still meeting today, but but I think it is important to consider that you can take your time and wait until you have some of these answers and then roll it out in a way, in a fashion that um, is a little bit more comprehensive than trying to do it a day and then figure things out and then do it a different day and figure things out. So the timing on this is fairly flexible, and I think the state superintendent has really done a good job in outlining that funding will continue to flow to school districts whether they are in teaching or teaching online, or whether or not they're out due to this pandemic. So I think it's worthwhile to take a step back, understand that there's a lot of things on this list, but you can take your time to figure these things out and do it right.
Yeah, and so as you're just considering these issues and preparing to write your plan, as Ryan said, you can multi-stage it. You can think in the short term we're able to do this, in the long term we're able to do this. But these are considerations in general as we're making decisions about how to move forward, um, kind of as you go. And then you're going to be taking those considerations, and you're going to be start thinking about a plan. And like Ryan said, this plan could be multi-staged or multifaceted. It could be that we're going to start by just taking these as snow days, or days where we're not going to be in school, for lack of another term. Snow day seems to fit. Like Ryan said, the superintendent has already said that they will waive the hour requirement if you send in the appropriate paperwork and your board approves it, so that you don't have to take the hit on your hours that are required for students to be in class. So maybe you take the next couple of days, or maybe you take a couple of days around spring break and actually do some trainings and do some planning and kind of work through this. And then you move towards more of a remote teaching and how we can do some synchronous teaching, and then maybe move to more of an asynchronous or online. You can stage this out, but it's important that you start having a plan and that you know what your plan is going to be, so that all parties involved have the best information. And unfortunately, because this is relatively unprecedented, your plan will have to be fairly flexible. It's not going to be a in stone static plan, because as more information comes in, as things change, you'll want to be able to vary your plan and adjust. But in general, you want to write out what your plan is so that all stakeholders can see the plan as it evolves. It may be a Google Doc that can be updated through time, it may be multiple iterations, but you'll want to have a written plan, and you want to have checklists for the things that need to be completed and who's going to be responsible for completing each one of those items and making sure they're available. You'll want to have a plan for how you're going to take attendance. So how are you going to meet the 2.5 or the 4 hour requirement for attendance? There is specific code that the State Department has put out that details how you can count online instruction towards your 4 hours. And in general, it's if you provide the student 4 hours worth of work in a day, they can be counted as being in session during that day. How are you going to communicate that plan? You should have a communication plan for which stakeholders are going to be informed. When are they going to be informed of changes to the plan? How are they going to receive the plan and what the plan is for at least today? And what are your thoughts moving forward and your kind of contingencies as you move along? You need to train on the plan, meaning that your staff's aware of what's and how it's going to work, and your students are aware, and your parents, and do some training on how to implement it. You need to have staff expectations in the plan, and we'll show some examples of that in the next couple of slides. Community partners need to be made aware of the plan and how they might interface with the plan and help actually achieve the plan goals. You want to have your interactions with the plan. You want to have work measurements as part of your plan. You want to have work continuity as part of your plan. Some learning targets so that you can ensure that learning is still happening. And you want to list some information about how your accommodations will work in this online environment.
In just a little bit, we'll be showing you some practical examples of these items. And so if you're wondering, well, what do those exactly mean and how would those look? There's some practical examples that we'll be able to show you.
So here's some examples of some expectations. So you can have both student and teacher expectations when working online. First, your students should be expected to be able to demonstrate their learning. And demonstrating their learning may be different than how you might have done it in the past. Assessments will not work the same way, potentially online. So while in class, physically, you might be able to give an assessment and have a teacher monitor that the students are not looking up answers or cheating in some way. When you move to an online environment, there's a chance that you're going to be having to adjust that because you won't be able to guarantee that the students aren't looking up answers. You're not going to be able to guarantee that the students have used some kind of rote memorization. You might have to move towards assessments that are less multiple choice, less short answer, and more long answer. So you can gauge that the students are actually learning and give them that ability to demonstrate it. Maybe having them build PowerPoints or slides they can submit, or doing other work than the traditional. You want to make sure that the students have the ability or expectation that they still collaborate with their peers, that they're not isolated, that they have chances for group discussion, discussion boards, maybe live group meets and things of that nature. And that they're able to, that they should be contacting their teacher for questions via email or through your LMS or other communication platform. Your teachers also can have expectations. They should be monitoring your student progress. They should likely be holding virtual office hours where students can drop in and out using a platform like Google Meet, where they can have it open on their computer, hopefully their camera and microphone muted just in case students pop in and out at the wrong time, but allowing those students to pop in and out and ask questions during those office hours. That the teacher should still be collaborating with their colleagues and discussing things with them, and that they should be attending any professional development you put out to help them further their instruction. So once you've got your plan written, you want to make sure you communicate the plan. And the plan should start off by answering the why. You should be able to explain to all stakeholders why you're going to continue learning and not just shut down school, and the importance of continuing that learning. You want to build buy-in from your teachers, students, parents, businesses, and communities so everybody is in agreement, or at least as many people as you can get on board with why you're going to continue this process. The more buy-in you have, the better it's going to roll out and work. You want to include timelines about when things will happen or change. When is spring break? How are you going to come back from spring break? What is the expectation? If students need to pick up devices, when can they? For the best you're able to include those timelines. You want to hold informational meetings, which this one's a little bit tougher now to do, but in general, maybe record some webinars or talking points that you can put out on your website or through social media so parents and everybody can understand the plan, and whenever possible, live stream it so they can ask questions. And then you want to put the plan in easy to access locations. Websites, again, are a great place to put that plan where people can get to it on your main page and see, this is how we're going to handle this issue.
Well, I think that it's also interesting to note that these plans can start out simple, and it can be just instructions to students to begin reading certain materials and then jump on a live video conference and talk through those or reply via email to those. It can start out simple and then advance as your teachers and your staff feels more comfortable. But communicating that plan out at the very beginning shows that shows that your organization has a plan and expects this to evolve over time.
So then you want to provide training to all your participants. Make sure your staff understand the plan. Again, this is a little bit harder now that most of us have shut down. It's a little easier before we were. But you want to provide some e-learning PD. That might be in directing them towards Google's resources and blogs that will share some links to get to those about how to use Google Classroom. You might want to direct them towards maybe Zoom's trainings on how that can be implemented, or the trainings IDLA is doing that we're going to share coming up. But make sure your staff have access to PD so they are ready to make this transition. You might want to provide resources and training to parents, whether that's webinars that you'll put on yourself, or again, directing resources about how they can support their students at home. How can they help make sure their students continue to learn? You want to provide some eDay learning to the students. You might need to provide training on how to actually best practices for working from home. How do you build a schedule? How do you stay on task? What are those digital citizenship tools that they can use to be productive and continue learning while you're shut down. And then make sure that they understand how to use the technology. Make sure you have resources and guides available so they know how to actually get onto the computer, to log in, to get to the resources they need. Put those trainings out there and make them available. This one's a little bit late, but in general, we were recommending that practice the plan. So if you haven't shut down yet, you can actually practice going to an eDay learning within the normal school day. You can actually have students just switch teachers class, have their regular teacher still continue the lesson, but just do it remotely. So they'll be supervised by another teacher at that time, and each teacher will be teaching a different class than what they have physically in the room. So that's just one way that you could practice it if you haven't shut down already. And then in the long term, if you build an evolving plan that can survive year after year, maybe consider adding into your calendar a couple of eDays a year just as practice, because we all know the more you practice something, the less scary it is, the better that it works. In the same way that we practice fire drills, maybe think about building into your calendar a couple eDay practices every year so that people are ready.
You know, Will, this morning I heard from someone saying, well, I remember when Mount St. Helens blew and we were off for an extended period of time. Or we all remember Snowmageddon a couple of years ago in which we were all off for an extended period of time. So I think the work and the preparation that you put in place to offer remote or eDay learning now is going to have applicability in the future as well, as there will likely be other scenarios in which the use of an eDay will be used in the future.
And kind of to that point, make sure you evaluate your practices and evaluate this time where we're already moving this direction. So without the time to practice, at least be collecting data and evaluating how it's going now and how it will be going in the next several weeks as you move towards these eDays. And collect that data, survey your parents, talk to your students, talk to your staff, and make sure that you're evaluating how all of this is working. Make sure you've got that data and you're collecting it, writing it down somewhere. So when you go back and revise your plan, which is a step coming up, you remember everything that happened, all the changes you had to make, basically just a log so that you can build the best plan possible for the next time we may be in this situation. And then once we're back, or after you've practiced, reflect on your plan. Identify those areas where you had to make improvements or you need to make improvements. Identify the solutions and make sure you write down the solutions that you implemented along the way. And then revise your written plan to meet those solutions or to solve those areas where you needed improvements. And then in the long run, make sure you review your plan annually and make sure it's still up to date. Make sure it still works. Make sure that if you're referencing certain LMSs or collaborative tools, that you still have those, or do you need to update your plan and add in your new tools? So now we're going to talk a little bit about some toolkits. And Ryan, if you want to.
Sure. Go ahead and hit the next slide there, Will. So there are a couple of toolkits that we have found have some great information on moving to an eDay. You know, many of the big major bullet points of this presentation were pulled from some of the work that Indiana has been doing over the past couple of years. And Indiana Department of Education is there. There is a hyperlink, a list of references and toolkits at the end of this presentation. The presentation will be available for you to go through on your own and click those hyperlinks. It's a Google presentation, so it should be fairly easy for you to access it after this presentation and be able to click on these links. Both of these are hyperlinks that when you click on will take you out to those locations. And Indiana has some great resources in terms of planning. There are checklists that you can go through. There's a whole lot of different activities that will help you prepare for your eDay and think about things like the attendance more thoroughly. And then on the right, there's also, this is from the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. They have some great materials for long-term planning, but also some materials that students can use at the elementary level and whatnot. And again, there'll be a bunch of resources and links at the end of this presentation. I think what you'll find is that a lot of people are coming forward with some great resources that can be used during this time period. And we're going to try to aggregate those and create those links so that you can access them simply.
And we'll have a link at the end of our presentation to IDLA's eDay page. And we're adding all the resources we find, we're adding to that page as links. So you can check back there regularly, and we're adding the most we can. Just a little bit more on the Indiana and Wisconsin. The Wisconsin has a bunch of modules and very, very detailed items that may be too much for now, but would be great resources for long-term planning. On the Indiana one, there's a lot of great resources for doing it immediately, including they actually have elementary lesson plans on the Indiana page, which is, I know, one thing that most of the curriculum providers are struggling with is how to help kindergarten, first grade, second grade. And they actually have a few lesson plans for those grade levels that you can get to on the Indiana page.
Next up, we really wanted to talk about the offerings that we are providing in terms of content. So content and support that IDLA is providing, it comes in three core areas. The first one is in content, and available through July 1st, all of the core subjects and most electives are available to you to utilize for free. And so this includes all of our digital textbook materials for grades 7 through 12. And if you signed up for our form, you likely received an email that has a link to all of these materials, and it will pop up a little bit like the upper right hand corner. And once they click on the specific area that they're wanting to learn, that will take them to our digital textbook materials. Now, just like any other classroom, you're going to have to, when you buy textbooks, that isn't the end of the teaching that you need to do for the students. You need to wrap around things with those textbooks. And it's the same thing with the materials that we're providing here. In our classes, we wrap around a whole bunch of activities, assessments, interactions to these textbooks. And because you're going to be delivering this mainly through live instruction, we wanted to make sure that you knew that these materials are probably one piece of a broader pie that you'll be delivering to your students. These materials can be used in any LMS or Google Classroom, and even if you're starting out on email, you can deliver them just as hyperlinks in an email to your students as well. So that is the first thing of what we're doing. Did you want to add anything there, Will?
Yeah, I should say what you'll get is you're actually going to open up a Google Doc, and the Google Doc is going to have hyperlinks to every one of the courses we're able to deliver this way. The courses that you won't see in here are the dual credit courses, because those are linked into the universities, the AP courses, because those are linked into College Board. And we do have a few courses where we license content that we're not able to deliver for free. But all of this content was written by Idaho teachers, Idaho certified teachers, to Idaho standards. And so these should all be aligned with what you're already doing in your classes. You'll be able to open that Google Doc, find the class that you want to get content for. When you click on that class, it'll open a new Google Doc that'll have every unit and lesson of our class as far as the textbook goes. Then when you click on that link, it'll open you up into a program called CourseArc, which is where we store our courses. Again, this won't have any of the supports or services that we put around our own classes that we can provide through our LMS and through having our live teachers teach it, but at least it'll be content that you can use in your own classes.
Another area of importance with these materials is that they were created to Idaho standards. And so these are not specific, these are aligned to Idaho standards, but more importantly, we're working through the Idaho standards as we're creating these. So in most of these materials, you'll actually see references to the Idaho standards that they are actually teaching. And so it should be aligned fairly well with the content that your teachers are currently teaching. The second thing that we're doing is we're doing some preparation, and that includes, this is one of the administrator webinars. We also have teacher webinars that are coming up later on this week. One is utilizing Google Meet and video conferencing, and the other is taking the content and the links that we're providing and implementing them in your school. We're also looking at adding in additional webinars for technology directors. All of our webinars that we are creating and providing are available on that eDay website, and we'll give you a link here in a little bit. The final thing that we're offering is support. And so starting today, we are launching our service of support, which basically any of your teachers can come into our support system, and we will start a live video conference with them and then walk them through any challenges that they're having in e-learning. So we have our experts that are going to be on call to support your teachers as they move forward. And we have a system that it will distribute that across our staff so that when they come in, they will have the opportunity to have live feedback and support as they move forward.
And so starting at 8 a.m. Thursday morning, that system will be
Thursday
up
morning.
and live.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Will. I thought it was this morning, but that must have been when we're getting all of our people in.
Yep, so we're currently training all of our staff on this so that as many of our staff as possible. We're converting most of our organization over to be a support organization for schools during this time. We'll also still continuing our classes and providing support to our students, but so we're training up all of our staff on how to use these support tools and how they're already experts and have expertise around how to deliver online content, but we're training them on how to use the tools so that you can come in and chat with them and discuss things through our portal that's normally meant for providing technical support, that's now going to be converted over to providing curricular support. So here we have a list of resources. This is a small list of what's now on our website. If you go to our website, you'll see an even larger list. It'll include all of these resources you see here. A couple to call out is the one that says Google Teacher Training and the one that says Google Distance Learning Resources. Google is putting together a bunch of blogs, videos, and resources to help teachers convert over to Google Classroom and over to Google Meets. But they're not the only company doing it. Microsoft is putting out information. Zoom is providing free things. There's a lot of companies that are trying to provide free resources and support. And again, as we hear of those, we are adding them to our resource page. If you have any you would like us to add to that page, please feel free to email Ryan or I, and we will get it onto that page so that everybody has access.
Also, I know that many of you are looking at what if we provide this at the high school level, what are you going to be doing at the elementary school level? We are taking the PERC resource, and it's PERC. The link, we'll just provide the link to you guys later, but the PERC is a place where there is aggregated information about content according to age level and then also according to content area. And so there's a website that we put together that aggregates, although we're not providing any of the elementary resources, we are aggregating the resources that we find that are coming in. And there are over 500 resources that are on that site right now, and we'll be adding more as those come in. The other thing that I wanted to highlight is this, how BK handles attendance, coordination, and assignments. Earlier in our slide deck, we talked a little bit about taking attendance, coordinating what the deliveries are, making sure that students can get into their virtual environment. And BK created a video of how they did that during the snowpocalypse a couple of years ago. And I've highlighted and linked that there because I think it's a good way to understand a practical application to some of the things that we've talked about earlier. Basically, what they do is they have a centralized Google Sheet where students come in and then they find out what is due for that day in that particular class. They also have information to click on to get into their virtual classroom link. So they use a centralized Google Doc to handle that. And then they've also handled attendance utilizing Google Spreadsheets. And so a great link there if you're wondering about some of the practical application of doing this. Also, Illinois is a resource that we recently added over the weekend, and they have practical resources that you can copy, like attendance check-in sheets and things like that.
Lastly, you can also click on that example IDLA curriculum, and you can try out those linking Google Docs that we talked about that'll eventually take you to CourseArc and watch some of our videos and play with. It's one of our full courses there that you can go and look at as far as a textbook goes to try that out. If you are interested in getting access to all of our materials, there is a link on our eDay page, which you can see the address here. All you have to do is fill out that Google form and you'll automatically get an email that has a link to all of our content. So with that, we'll jump over and start answering any questions you might have. Feel free to throw them over in the chat and we will start answering.
I'm going to stop our recording here and start a new recording.